Hello everyone, welcome. We're glad you could join us today for our allyship training. This June, a time to reflect, to celebrate, and to build an understanding of the LGBTQ community, we're pleased to be here with you to discuss the importance of allyship and the power of creating psychological safety for individuals to thrive in the workplace. I'm Devin. I use she, her pronouns, along with my colleagues Connor, Chris, and Britt, all members of Pride at BCG and on our business services team. Honored to spend time with you sharing some of what we have learned about the queer and trans community. None of us claim to know all on this topic, but today we aim to give you valuable perspective and share some ways and habits you can practice to be a better ally. In today's training, we'll cover 3 main topics. 1, the importance of creating safe spaces for teams. 2, ally actions that you can take. And 3, a deeper dive on how to use and respect pronouns. We encourage you to comment and raise questions during the session. We've already received some thoughtful queries and we will be responding during and after today's live event. The last year has further underscored the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion for all. It is on each of us as individuals to learn, to grow, and to take on the work of building empathy for those unlike ourselves. Allyship trainings can be fruitful investments. Our research has shown that straight cis participants in ally programs are twice as likely to recognize discrimination than employees who don't have a program in place, and allies are 3.3 times more likely to intervene when witnessing a discriminating event or comment. We know that creating safe spaces for individuals can improve performance, that diverse teams can boost innovation, and that inclusive cultures lead to added value. Next, we'll hear more from Connor on creating safe spaces on teams.
Hi everyone, my name is Connor, and today I want to talk about 2 topics. The first is psychological safety, and the second is covering. I think that understanding both of these topics is a really important first step towards creating safe spaces on teams. So why don't we start with psychological safety? Psychological safety is a team climate characterized by mutual understanding and interpersonal trust, where individuals feel comfortable being themselves. It's an environment where individuals feel comfortable taking risks and asking questions and learning from each other as they go. Psychological safety was first introduced in the 90s by a professor of organizational behavior named Amy Edmondson. And it's taken on renewed importance today as companies work to create more diverse and inclusive teams. And I really want to emphasize that diversity and inclusion often do not occur simultaneously. Psychological safety is needed to generally bridge the gap between a diverse team, one made up of individuals from a variety of different backgrounds, to a team where people feel that they are included and they belong. So why don't we set psychological safety aside for a moment and talk about our next topic, covering. Covering is a concept put forth by Professor of Constitutional Law Kenji Yoshino in the mid-2000s. And many LGBTQ individuals find themselves covering, especially at work. I want to emphasize covering is not staying in the closet. Many openly out of the closet LGBTQ individuals still feel that they have to hide or avoid drawing attention to certain aspects of their identity, especially at work. In fact, in a recent BCG study of over 2,000 LGBTQ individuals across a wide variety of industries, we found that roughly a third of respondents had covered at work over the last year. Now, covering manifests itself in a variety of ways. Today, I want to talk about 4 of the most common types of covering. The first common type of covering is covering by appearance. That's changing the way that you dress, the way that you groom yourself, the way that you cut your hair to better blend into the mainstream. One example of this could be a woman who dresses more traditionally feminine at work, wearing dresses, skirts, etc., but who in her personal life prefers to wear more masculine clothing. Next, we have covering by affiliation. This is avoiding behaviors and activities commonly associated with your stigmatized identity. So this could be a queer individual who doesn't want to go to their community pride event or their local office Pride Month celebration. Third, we have covering by advocacy. This is avoiding sticking up for your group. So this could be someone whose organization puts into place a policy that really disproportionately negatively affects their community. But they don't want to speak up because they don't want to be labeled as the person who only cares about gay issues. And finally, we have covering by association. This is not wanting to spend time with other individuals who are also part of this known stigmatized identity. So this could be not joining your office's LGBTQ plus affiliation group or not wanting to mentor other LGBT individuals. Okay, so now we've talked about psychological safety and covering. When covering exists on a team, it's often a clear sign that psychological safety does not. I want to conclude by talking about why all of this matters. Why should we be promoting psychologically safe teams where covering does not exist? So first, psychologically safe teams perform better. Teams where individuals are actively working to understand each other and feel understood in return tend to be more open, more candid, and able to operate greater than the sum of their parts. In fact, in 2012, Google performed a very interesting study called Project Aristotle, where they looked at what are the ingredients that make a high-performing team. They started by looking at the makeup of individual teams. Is a team full of extroverts a high-performing team? A team full of introverts? A team that is made up of entirely individuals from one gender? A completely gender-balanced team? What they found was absolutely none of this mattered. In fact, they found teams of individuals consisting of very similar backgrounds had drastically different levels of performance. So they stopped looking at who made up a team and they started looking at how teams interacted with each other. And what they found was teams with behaviors and norms that promoted psychological safety were often their highest performing teams. On a team, when an individual felt that nothing was off the table, that they could bring their whole self and their unique identity and perspective, collaboration actually energized them and improved outcomes for the group. Conversely, on teams where the idea of speaking up or challenging a colleague put a pit in someone's stomach, collaboration often felt draining and harmed outcomes for the group. The second reason that psychological safety is important is no one's going to do it for you. In the White House, they say there is no other meeting down the hall. And what that means is the room that you are in is the one where important decisions are being made. And I'd encourage you to take the same approach with psychological safety. It's not something that can be created by emails from leadership or winning external awards. And it's also something that varies drastically across different teams at the same organization. Psychological safety is something that has to be built at the rock face by you on your team across many interactions. The last reason it's important to promote psychological safety on teams is also the most simple. It's the right thing to do. I want to be clear. We're not encouraging you to promote psychological safety on your team because it's going to have some impact on the bottom line. That's a great perk. We're doing it because it's unequivocally the right thing to do. Many individuals who are part of stigmatized groups outside of the LGBTQ plus community feel that they need to cover. That could be a parent who doesn't want to talk about their kids at work because they don't want someone to question their commitment to their job, or it could be somebody who changes their hair color or hairstyle to de-emphasize some aspect of their identity, like their age or their race. Covering can cause stress, it can cause depression, it can manifest itself physically. How can somebody possibly be completely present in their environment when so much of their energy is going into managing how those around them are perceiving them? So I'm going to stop there and pass it off to Chris to talk a little bit about allyship in action.
So now that we understand the importance of allyship and fostering safe spaces, we can chat about some concrete ways in which to accomplish this. There are, of course, infinite actions folks can take to support the LGBTQ community, but we're going to focus on 7 tips here. First, educate yourself. There are lots of ways to learn more about LGBTQ history, culture, politics, theory, and news, from books to films to trainings like this. Our only guidance is that you stick to content actually created by queer or trans people. 2, ask how you can support. If a situation comes up either at work or in your personal life or even in the news, don't be afraid to ask how you can best support the LGBTQ people in your life. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide. Third, show up. Attend office and other LGBTQ events at work or school or in your city that you're invited to. In-person support, goes a long way alone and is definitely noticed. Give to LGBTQ organizations. You can donate time or money to support queer and trans organizations. And we encourage you to donate to local charities or organizations centered on those most in need. Especially in times when LGBTQ issues are in the news, a lot of times donations are overly concentrated on popular, big national organizations, but we should be sure to also give support to smaller organizations in our communities that could use it just as much, if not more. You can also give money directly to queer and trans people who need it. Your donations don't always need to be, to tax deductible or 501c3 organizations. 5, make space for dialogue. Many of us who are out at work are still not asked about our personal lives, maybe out of fear of making us uncomfortable. But you should be inclusive here and show your support by creating space for us to share. But at the same time, of course, remember that not everyone is out and comfortable, which is totally okay. So we should be sensitive to where people are at. I feel like this tip and the previous one represent a bit of a balancing act where you want folks to feel comfortable sharing, but also want to be sensitive to where they're at and respectful of personal choices, preferences, and boundaries. And lastly, but certainly not least, don't assume anyone's gender or the gender of their partners. Best practice, especially in casual conversation with strangers, is to default to gender-neutral language until you know someone's pronouns. Britt is going to go way more into this in the next section. But first, I want to go back and double-click on what I mentioned before about asking folks how you can support them. More specifically, if you're in a situation at work where you've witnessed harmful language or inappropriate jokes. Of course, best practice is always contextual, but here are 3 tips that we have. 1, avoid laughing. I think for, whatever reason, a reflex for many people in these situations, even when they're uncomfortable with what was said, is to laugh along in an attempt to diffuse awkwardness or tension. You should avoid this, though, because it can make people feel unsupported or undermined. So please just be aware of your reaction and the message that you're potentially sending with it. 2, in a lot of situations, the best solution is to quickly take control of the situation. This can mean pivoting and quickly moving the conversation forward. You don't always want to dwell on a point, and not all folks want you to defend them in a public way or bring more attention to the comment. But of course, this is contextual, like we said, and it may be important to make it publicly clear in that moment that what was said was not okay, especially if you're in a position of power. But regardless, after the situation has passed, follow up privately with the affected people. It can be something like, hey, I noticed they were using the wrong pronouns for you in that meeting. I wanted you to know that I see you and I'm here to support you if there's anything I can do. It also may be appropriate to privately address the individual who made the comments. But again, not everybody may want you to, so it's best to talk to the person affected first.
Beyond just being a basic part of speech, pronouns are a really important way of communicating identity. We'll talk a bit more in this section about some pronouns you may and may not be so familiar with, why correct pronoun use is important, how to ask for and encourage pronoun sharing, and what to do if, more like when, you make a mistake. Formally put, a pronoun is simply a linguistic tool or a word that can function by itself in place of a proper noun. However, when we're thinking about pronouns in a more personal sense, they can be something that's used to communicate gender identity. This chart shows just a sample of some of the pronouns that you might see used to refer to people of varying gender identities. The 2 sets that you're probably the most familiar with are she, her, hers, and he, him, his. A third set is they, them, theirs. And a lot of people like the they pronoun, including myself, because it can tend to be a bit more gender neutral or remove any sense of gendering. In fact, you probably use the they pronoun much more often than you realize already. An example of another pronoun that you might see used is sie, zir, zimself. However, there are endless possibilities for pronouns that people may ask for you to use for them. This is a constantly evolving space, and queer and trans people will continue to evolve language to better fit the needs of our communities. It's also worth noting that some people might have two or more sets of pronouns that align with their sense of identity. You might also have people who ask not to be referred to by any pronouns, in which case you might just refer to them by their name. One of the questions I hear the most often is, how will I know what pronouns someone uses? So there are many ways we can gather information about pronouns, and it can be helpful to think about this on a spectrum from passive to active. On the passive end of our spectrum, in conversations, you can listen to the pronouns that are used in reference to someone that you might not know. You can also avoid using gendered language or pronouns until you've been introduced to someone. This might look like defaulting to they or your partner or the associate on your team, perhaps. This is a really great option for relationships where you don't necessarily feel comfortable having a direct conversation or where communication doesn't happen on a consistent basis, or perhaps relationships where there is a pretty large gap in seniority. Secondly, you can share your pronouns. Everyone has pronouns. Pronouns are not just something that trans or non-binary people have. Sharing your pronouns can help normalize pronoun sharing and make it more comfortable for people who might use non-normative pronouns in the working environment. You should consider adding your pronouns to your email signature, to your Zoom name, business cards, or name tags. Anywhere where you might include your name or your title is a really great place to get comfortable adding your pronouns to. The last point on sharing, since we don't often use gendered pronouns to refer to ourselves, it's important that we actively encourage sharing them often. It's important to remember that pronouns are not static, and identity is not static either. They can change over time, or depending on what context you're in. This is why an open dialogue and consistent opportunities for people to verbally state how they would like to be identified is crucial. As leaders and allies, remember that many people will follow your lead in sharing your pronouns. This practice can make great strides in encouraging a more welcoming and inclusive working environment. Lastly, and the most active on our spectrum, is asking. In some situations, you may not be able to gather pronouns from simply listening or sharing, and since it's critical to get pronouns right, this may mean you need to ask. So personally, individually, this may look something like, hi, my name's Britt, and I use they, them pronouns. How should I refer to you? Or in a group setting, perhaps you're kicking off a new case, you could say something like, hi, welcome to our case team kickoff. Before we begin, we'd like to share our names and pronouns. It's also okay just to share your name if you aren't sure what I'm asking you or if you prefer not to share. My name is Britt, and I use they, them pronouns. An important thing to recognize in this example is that we should never force anyone to share their pronouns. We should aim to set the tone when we ask about pronouns, whether individually or in a group setting, that this is a space where pronoun use is welcomed and encouraged, but it's also a space where sharing is never required. The second question that I hear the most often is, what happens if I mess up? No one's perfect. Even people who are well-versed in using a variety of different pronouns make mistakes, and that's okay. The main thing to keep in mind is that allyship is a daily active practice, and the allyship is meant to challenge you, not to make you more comfortable. In general, the best course of action when you realize you've made a mistake or misgendered someone is just to quickly and sincerely apologize, correct the word that you've mistakenly used, and then move on. So for a couple of examples, this might look something like, let's say it's in the moment. She's a great teammate. I'm sorry, he's a great teammate. He's been an outstanding addition, and it's a pleasure to work with him. Another example might look like something where you've misgendered someone in a conversation earlier and need to go back and correct yourself. You could say something along the lines of, I'm really sorry I used the wrong pronouns for you in that meeting earlier. I know you go by they, them, and I will make sure I get it right next time. Remember, perfection is not expected, and growth and making progress as you learn more is encouraged. Just aim to do your research and address people with intention, listen to feedback, and then be accountable for the impact that your words and actions have.
Once again, we thank you for spending time with us, and we hope that you feel empowered to be a better ally to the LGBTQ plus community. On behalf of all of us at Pride at BCG, we're wishing you a happy Pride